fallout from Michael Wolff's book on the Trump presidency. Joining us from Manchester, New Hampshire, President Trump's first campaign manager, Corey Lewandowski, who is now chief strategist for America First Action, a pro-Trump super PAC. Corey, what do you think of the book, and how accurate is it?
Well, Chris, let me first say Happy New Year, and let me be very clear. This is a book of fiction. Not only is it not accurate, there are so many misrepresentations in this book that it shouldn't be taken seriously. And if you look at the critics of Mr. Wolff, his contemporaries, his colleagues, the New York Times, CNN, clearly not people who have been friendly or supportive of this president or his administration, they have called into question the simple facts that are in this book as factually inaccurate. And Mr. Wolff himself claimed at the very beginning of the book that it looks like he's taken liberties to put things in the book that may not have happened, but he lets the reader decide. That is not journalistic integrity, and this book is a complete fabrication.
All right. But here's one excerpt of the book where Michael Wolff describes your relationship with the president's two sons, Don Jr. and Eric, and also Jared Kushner. Let's put it up. Lewandowski regarded both brothers and their brother-in-law with rolling-on-the-floor contempt. Not only were Don Jr. and Eric stupid, and Jared both supercilious and obsequious, the butler, but nobody knew a whit about politics. Fact is, you didn't think much of Don Jr., who helped force you out as campaign manager.
You know, Chris, it's very important to know Mr. Wolff and I never spoke about this book. So where he comes up with these assertions of what I think of the Trump kids or Jared Kushner are completely made up. I've never spoken to him about this. And so let me be as clear as I can be. And look, I talk about this in my book. I think Eric and Don are fantastic advocates for their father. I have a very close working relationship with Jared Kushner. I respect what he has done by leaving his business and coming to government service. So these, again, are made-up accusations from a person who never spoke to me about my opinion of anybody in the Trump orbit or the Trump family.
Well, okay, but one could argue that your views of some of these people we just talked about were known to other people. I have a lot of respect for you, Corey, but your discretion and your your lack of giving your views is not one of the things that I necessarily agree with. Let me ask you another question. Honestly, did you ever refer to Jared as the butler?
Look, Chris, I've never done that, and that's such, that's such conjecture. It's such speculation. It shouldn't have ever been printed. And like I heard on the entire chapter that this guy wrote about the CPAC event, he never called Matt Schlapp at CPAC or anybody else to talk about it. He never called me. I never sat down. So for him to say I called anybody anything without talking to me is an injustice to the integrity of publishing a book. The guy's a liar is what it comes down to, and I don't think anybody who looks at what is in this book can take it honestly. So look, Chris, I've been very clear. I don't think I should have been fired by the Trump campaign after helping to steer the candidate through 38 primaries and caucuses and help him get more votes than any candidate in the history of the Republican Party. But the family made a decision to have me moved out in June of 2016, and that was a decision that we've now lived with. But the bottom line is, I never spoke to Wolff. And whether, was I disappointed in June of 2016? You bet I was. But have I done everything humanly possible from that day to make sure the Trump agenda moves forward, whether it was right after I left the campaign on television or to this day on the outside? You bet I have.
You also think that if you hadn't been fired, Trump would have won more than 306 electoral votes.
Well, look, I'd love to say that I could have maybe helped deliver New Hampshire because selfishly I want to see him win my home state, and I wanted to see him win Nevada. It was an amazing election victory that Donald Trump gets all the credit for, but I do think there could have obviously been a role for me at that campaign had I not been asked to leave.
It's not fabricated, it's real, it's off the cuff, well said nonetheless.
Basically
You can
says
take to the bank. You will not see this on MSNBC.
To be the commander-in-chief. Here he is.
The one description that everyone gave, everyone has in common, they all say he is like a child. And what they mean by that is he has a need for immediate gratification.
Chris, I spend 18 hours a day, 7 days a week for almost 2 years next to candidate Trump, and I've had the high privilege of continuing to speak to the president as he has assumed that office. And I can tell you this, never have I seen anything like this. Michael Wolff hasn't spent any time with the candidate. He wasn't with us on the campaign trail. He hasn't been next to the president while he's been in the Oval Office making decisions. And if you look at what this man has achieved throughout his lifetime, it's not instant gratification. It's long-term success, whether it has been books or television or running for office. You know, it was 2 years ago this very week, 3 years ago this very week, I joined the Trump organization, the Trump team, to start planning that run for president. That's not instant gratification, and what Donald Trump achieved in that campaign was unparalleled success against an amazing field of Republican candidates that took 2 long years of dedication and hard work by candidate Trump to do something nobody ever thought he could do, and Wolf wasn't anywhere near that.
All right. Look, I want to make it clear, because I've talked a long time to you. You say it was 2 years ago that I did a power player on you. We've talked often since then. I've read your book, and clearly your admiration for Donald Trump is there. And in no way do you question his fitness. In fact, quite the contrary. You basically say he's kind of a genius. I don't know. I forget whether you use those words or not. But you also do talk about some behavior that is questionable, and I want to discuss that because that's also part of your description of him. You say the 4 major food groups on Trump Force 1 were McDonald's, Kentucky Fried Chicken, pizza, and Diet Coke. And here's what you say about what happens when the president often, or then candidate, would lose his temper. The mode that he switches into when things aren't going his way can feel like an all-out assault. It'd break most hardened men and women into little pieces. Around the campaign, we'd call it getting your face ripped off. Corey, you talk about one instance when the president got so upset, he's in a helicopter, I think you're in the helicopter with him, that he orders the pilot to fly it down so low that he can get cell phone service so he can chew out Paul Manafort.
Well, Chris, look, having your face ripped off by the president, as we describe it, is because we failed as a staff. This is a man who woke up every day and put 18 or 20 hours a day in every day on the campaign trail. And when something didn't go right, it wasn't because he wasn't giving 125% effort. It's because the staff failed him. The microphone didn't work properly. Something that we should have had done for him wasn't right, and that's the accountability. He expects, demands, and deserves the best, and he should have that. And when I failed as a campaign manager, he let me know. It makes me a better person for that. I didn't take it personally. I wanted to work harder because I saw what he was doing, and I forced our staff to work harder so that he got the very best. There's nothing wrong with that, Chris. I took that as a level of professionalism that forced me and my team to be better because that's what he deserved. Chris, you have to remember, at the significant early stage of this campaign, there were 4 or 5 people against the Republican juggernauts, right? Against the Bush campaign, the Walker campaign, the Cruz campaign, where they had hundreds of people. We were doing this with a much smaller team. And so what we had to do is we had to be perfect every day. And when we weren't, he held us accountable, and that's the right thing to do.
Okay, I've got about 2 minutes. I want to get into one last subject with you. Let's talk about accountability. Steve Bannon, you have generally gotten along with him. How do you explain him accusing Don Jr. And Jared of treason for their meeting with that Russian lawyer in June of 2016 at Trump Tower, and also suggesting that some of them may have been involved, including Jared, in money laundering? How do you explain him being so indiscreet?
Look, I can't explain that. There's no justification for that whatsoever. I know Don Jr. I know Jared Kushner. They're American patriots. Don loves his country. Jared loves his country. They have given up so much to help this country.
I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about Steve Bannon. Why would he do that?
Look, I can't justify what Steve said. If that's what Steve said, then he owes Donald Trump, he owes Donald Trump Jr., he owes Jared Kushner, the entire Trump family, an apology if that's what he said. And if that's what he said, then shame on Steve Bannon, because that is so out of bounds. To accuse somebody of treason is so out of line, so out of character for a guy like Steve Bannon that I have a hard time believing what Wolf wrote. But if that's what Steve said, then shame on Steve for doing that, because that is way out of line.
Final question, because here was the president at Camp David yesterday on both the author Michael Wolff and also on Steve Bannon. Here he is.
I never interviewed with him in the White House at all. He was never in the Oval Office. We didn't have an interview. Sloppy Steve brought him into the White House quite a bit, and it was one of those things. That's why Sloppy Steve is now looking for a job.
The president says he and Bannon are done. The Mercers, the conservative billionaire backers, said they've got no more dealings with Steve Bannon. 30 seconds. What is Steve Bannon's place in Republican politics now?
Go away.
Well, look, the only person that's in the Republican Party is the President of the United States, Donald Trump.
Susan Rice should be talking to him.
Voted for him.
And actually following her
Steve
advice
Bannon
as
or
well.
Becca Mercer or anybody else to be the President of the United States. They voted for Donald Trump. So if Steve Bannon wants to get on the Trump team and join with the President to make sure that we hold the House in 2018 and we hold the Senate or expand our majority, then he'll be welcome to do that. But if you want to run an agenda which is antithetical to the President's agenda, then there is no place in the Republican Party for you, because Donald Trump is the head of the Republican Party. He is the head of our